Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our next breakout session for today's Let's Learn Live Summit. As a reminder for anyone who recently joined, we started the call by putting everyone on mute. So if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. If you are interested in submitting for CPE credit for attending this session, please be sure to complete the survey at the end of the broadcast. This survey will be available once the session ends. Finally, we are recording this session and we'll be sending a link of the recording to all attendees within an hour after this webcast. Please refer to the handout section to download a copy of the slides. Now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today for SmartConnect, Taking the Training Wheels Off, Senior GP Implementation Consultant, Natalie Avery. So without further ado, Natalie, I'll hand it off to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are going to talk about SmartConnect today, and I'm going to try to keep all of the information that I want to give you into the 50 minutes that we have. So if I don't get to all of it, I apologize ahead of time. So this is my agenda. We are going to take a look at the navigation of SmartConnect, briefly how you set it up, some of the built-in tools that they offer. Next, we'll open a map and we'll talk about the different ways we can look at data and get data. And then the other things we can do with the data, we can send it to GP or other places. We will go into some more detailed, granular information inside the map. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to talk about after-map, post-map processes, and then some troubleshooting tips. And with that, I'm going to switch over to my application. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is navigation. And if you look up here, we have tabs at the top, along with these buttons on each tab. So this will be your main tab, the map tab. This is where you see a list of all of your maps. You see your names. If you have groups on them, you can sort by clicking on the headers. You can see the last time that it was run, which I find very useful. You can look over here. If there are checkboxes, you can tell that that map is scheduled. And speaking of schedules, you can put maps on a schedule and they run on their own. And if I want to see what those are and when they're going to run, I can click this schedule button. I don't have any in here right now. We'll go back to maps. Some of the other buttons up here that are important and I use all the time, obviously open, create. Sometimes I create a new map and I don't see it in the list, so I just click the refresh button and it usually pops up. And this is also how I can delete a map. Now, this one is my favorite, duplicating maps. Often I will have a map that runs, an import map, and it works great, but someone's asked me to try something new with it, try something different, use a different source. Instead of making changes to my map that works, I will often duplicate or copy that map and then make my changes to the copy. Once they're good, I either move them over to the production version or I just use the new one. We can run the map, so you can run a map by opening it and clicking the run button, or you can just click the run button and save a couple clicks. Activity, if I click on that, it tells me who has a map open. If I can't run a map because someone else has it open, I can click on that button and it will tell me who it is. And if we know that that person really isn't logged in and it's just a stranded lock on the map, we can click on that line and hit that minus button and it will remove it. I'm not going to do that here because I do actually have the map open down below. And then map logs. So I will show you how you can turn this on. And what this does is if I've turned this on in one of my import maps, it will track how the map ran what records came in, what records didn't come in, and the errors. It is very useful, especially when you've scheduled a map and it runs without you looking at it, and you need to know exactly what happened and why. The map log is a great tool. So we're going to move on to setup. Now this one is probably the most important button. So we go in here, for GP, which is what we're talking about today. I'm going to double click on that. This is how SmartConnect knows where to look for GP. If you have multiple instances of GP, you can actually set up to a test version and a production version and point your test version to your other development instance. You would have to put your server name in. This is your SQL server. If it has an instance, if you have multiple instances of SQL running in one installation, you would have to put the instance there. And then we just tell it the name of Dynamics database and the user. And that part is pretty easy. I have found when we upgrade sometimes, the users will start running their maps and the data is not showing up in GP. And when we look in there, we find, oh, that's still pointed to the old server. So it's a good thing to check after you do an upgrade. You can also set up emailing inside of SmartConnect. And it is also a great tool when you're running scheduled maps. So if you're not running them and they error out, but you don't know it, if this is set up, we can put a little task on the map that will send you an email and give you a list of all of the records that did not make it in. That is your setup. I'm going to go to security. This is where we add users and we give users rights. So for example, if I wanted to add a user, I would click here and say add user. It does look to your Active Directory list of users. So it's going to look at Windows and see who you have set up as Active Directory users, and that is how you will add your users to this list. And then the way it works is whoever's logged in to Windows on that machine is how it's going to validate whether or not it lets you open SmartConnect. Some of the other things you can do, you can see here all of my users are admin users, which means they can do everything. But if I wanted to uncheck that admin user box for Natalie and then go over here, I can say, you know what, Natalie only needs to really run this AR transaction map. She doesn't need to worry about cash receipts or this sample. I will have to give her rights to the GP connector because that is the connector that we're using. And then I can also say, Natalie can only run maps and she can view logs. She cannot change the maps. She cannot export or import them, maintain them, or do anything with the scheduling. I do have some clients that have a map that runs and it's great. And for some reason, there's a user that loves to click on the delete button. So we had to take a bunch of rights away from her, and that seems to work. Say okay to that. In here, this isn't really that exciting. We will go on. So my next tab is the maintenance tab, and there's all kinds of stuff up there, but we're only going to talk about a couple. Number one is the import wizard and export tool. So for example, I talked about earlier, if I have a map that runs really well and I'm letting a bunch of users get in there and maintain it and click on the buttons, I might want to export that. I want to export it, back it up, save it off to the side, just in case the users, click on something they shouldn't, remove something that they shouldn't. It happens often. Another thing you can do is if you have SmartConnect installed in your development environment and you have a map that runs well, you can build it in your development environment, export it, and then import it into your production environment. This thing is running a little slow. Don't even have that many maps. And when you export them, you click the button. We will call this AR transaction. I can tell it, if I choose all the maps I have, it will create one file with all of those maps in it. I like to do separate files And that is because when you go to import them back in, it just makes it easier to choose just the specific maps that you want to import back in if you get to that point. So I usually always do create separate maps. I can expand on these little plus buttons and say which one I want, or maybe I want all of them. And then I export it. And it's done. And then if I go look out here in this folder, I will see that it took my what I wrote in there as a prefix and then took the name of the map and added it. And it's a SCE file, which is really just an XML file. And then once I've exported a map and I need to bring it back in, I use the import wizard, pull up that map. I'm not going to run it right now because I fear that it will take a long time, but it just steps you through and says, is this what you want to do? Do you want to, if you already have a map in there of the same name, it will overwrite it. Translation tables, I do use this on occasion. What this will do is allow you create this and it has a one-to-one list. So if I'm getting a file from some external source and their GL accounts have 1, 2, 3, but in GP the real value is 4, 5, 6, I can take this translation table, use it in my map and point and say, when I have a value that says 1, 2, 3, that means I want you to pass 4, 5, 6 over to GP. And it works really great as long as you only have 2 values. It really doesn't do anything more than, it doesn't do conditional or, like I said, more than 1 value, but it is a nice little tool and it's user friendly. If you have to constantly add to it, it's easy for your users to open this up and add to that. Nothing else in here we're really going to talk about. And then event logs, which is different than map logs. Map logs give you a record by record listing of what made it in or what didn't make it in. Event logs give you more information about errors that happened. So if you have a pre-task that's running and it has to log into a FTP site and download a file and put it in a folder and that task fails, you'll find that in the event log, but you will not find it in the map log. So do not confuse the two. They do give you separate information. If the map doesn't run and you don't know why, event logs is where you want to go look. If the map did run but it didn't bring everything in, map logs is where you will want to look. So I'm going to go back. So that is brief navigation of our tabs and toolbars. We talked about our connector and our email. This thing right here, this JET database engine, this is something that whenever I do the install of SmartConnect for you, I always download and install this. If you don't, then you will not be able to read Excel files. You should be able to read CSV files, but it really needs the drivers that are in there, especially if you're on a server that doesn't have Office installed. So anytime you install SmartConnect, you should always download and install the Microsoft JET database engine. We talked about translation tables, event logs. We talked about duplicating maps. All right, so we're going to get into some maps now. And I have one open down here. If you guys use SmartConnect, you know it is not the fastest software that you have on your computer. It takes its sweet time opening, and the maps kind of take their sweet time as well. And we kind of have to just live with that. It is still a great tool, and it offers so many benefits that is usually, I just have reserved myself to be patient with it. So this is a map, and this is a map that I've already built. And up here, if I just open this and I want to run it immediately, I have everything in place that I need. I can just click the run button and go. If I want to put this map on a schedule. Is that not going to let me run it? Okay, now I have to be patient. This is where I was talking about being patient. If I want to create a schedule for this map, I click that button and I create it. I can tell it to run daily, weekly, monthly, or just one time. I can tell it the time to start. I can tell it, if I say weekly, I can tell it what days of the week to run. I can tell it to repeat every 5 minutes for, and usually I can just say run until 6 p.m. And then it calculates the number of minutes for me. And if I wanted to say every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes or once an hour, I can choose that as well. Now, one thing to note about these schedules, if you do not have I will open that and we'll see how quickly that opens. There are 2 services that you need to have running in this services area for SmartConnect to get along with you. And I'm just going to click in here and hit the E on my keyboard. So the first one is eConnect. If you don't have this installed on the machine where you're running SmartConnect, you'll never be able to import anything into GP. This is how what SmartConnect does is it takes the data you've given it and it passes it over to this little tool. And this little tool is what validates everything. It says you gave me this customer number. I'm going to check to see if that customer number exists in GP. If it doesn't, I'm going to throw error. If you gave me this GL account, I didn't find it, I'm going to throw an error. So this is very important, and it's equally as important for it to be running. The next one, the next E, and these two I think are somewhat confusing because this one is eConnect and this one is E1 SmartConnect. They're very similar names. The E1 SmartConnect is the scheduler. This does not need to be running if you don't have a schedule set up. If you are not scheduling your maps and they're all run manually, this doesn't need to be running, and it will figure that out and stop itself. But if you find that you do have schedule maps and they're not running, this is the first place you should look. Check for your E1 SmartConnect service, make sure it's running. Now you'll see mine is not running, and that's because I don't have any scheduled maps. And I don't want any right now. So that is just a fun tidbit about scheduling maps. Next, I'm going to go on. So we have 2 sections in this on our main tab, and it's source and destination. Data source, this is our file, our database, the data that we have that we want to push into GP. This top section is all about the source data. So usually I always do bulk load. I have never really written these changes only or real time because they can be memory hogs, although some of my coworkers have had to do these real time events and they're pretty slick. Now this list, it's a nice long list, things you can do. So text files, what I have set up in my little simple virtual environment here. Now I can do folder data source. This is one of my favorites actually. And this one, I tell it, here's a sample of the file I want to import. But here's the source folder. And I could dump 1 file or I could dump 10 files in there. As long as they match the format of my template file, SmartConnect will consume them. And I have a bunch of integrations that I have written that use this feature. Anytime that you are getting more than 1 file at a time from your external source, you will want to use folder data source. It's a great tool that they put in here. Then we have, your typical Excels, all the different version of Excel. And again, like I said, you'll see these in the list, but if you don't have that JET database engine installed or 32-bit Excel installed, and 32-bit is important because SmartConnect is a 32-bit application, just like GP. You won't be able to read them. Multi-data source, that one's kind of cool as well, because what I can do is I can say, you know what, part one of these is a text file. Now I'll go get my little text file. And if I preview it, it shows me everything, and that's only because you'll notice this create schema file. What that does, if you've never had to click that button before, what that does is it tells SmartConnect how to read your file. You know, this column is the date, this column is the invoice. If it's a date, then read it as a date. If it's a number, read it as a number, that kind of fun stuff. I already have one built in there, so you can see that my file has all of these columns in it. And like I said, this is a multi-data source, so there's my text file, but I also need it to go and look at my customer list because I need some data from my customer list. So I might say that's my customer table. Let's see if I already have one in there. You know, they only give us the World Online Fabricam. Too far. And what I'm creating right now is an ODBC connection. So you can directly read data from GP. And let me type in this password because I cannot multitask. And pick. So what I've done here is I've told it the name of the SQL server, the password that it needs to use to get at my data, and down here I've told it the database. And I save it, close it. Now I'm going to choose that connection that I just created, and I'm just going to write a little SQL query against it. And I happen to already know that that's my customer master file. When I click the preview button, oh, it doesn't like me. RM00. Obviously, I lied about knowing the name of that table. So here is the table. And if I want, now I have two data sources, and I can link the two of them together by clicking the modify button. So my file is the important piece. My customer table is the second piece. And it's really nice graphical drag and drop. I can drag a little line over to here. And then I can even double click on that line. If you've ever worked in Access, it's kind of the same thing. And I can say select all from the left, which makes it a left outer join. If you know anything about joins, which means pick everything from my file and only the stuff that matches over here. I want all of these and all of these. So now when I preview this, I see everything from my file, and then I see everything from my customer master table as well, because I might need to use that when I'm mapping my fields. So we can stick with that right now. The other very important piece of this section is key fields. First of all, if you don't pick one, it won't even let you continue on. It will balk at you and say, you have not selected a key field. But the key fields, your choice of key fields is important because it will affect how your data is read and how it runs and gets pushed into GP. So I want to pick a field or series of fields that represents one record. So if I'm bringing in customer records or inventory items, I want to pick my customer ID, or for the inventory, I want to pick the item number. If I'm choosing transactions and my data has one invoice number each, I'm going to choose my invoice number. Sometimes I have to pick 2 or 3 fields in order to get that one record represented, but right now I tried to keep it easy and I only have the invoice field. So I'm now going to go down to the destination section And once I get down here, my choices, so the first thing I have to choose is where is this data going to go? I can export it to a file. So let's say I have to take that file, add a bunch of information to it, and then send it off to somebody else. I could do that. Microsoft Dynamics GP is the choice you want to make when you're importing into GP. There's the secondary Microsoft Dynamics GP. This one says to a file. Now that really is a tool that you use for troubleshooting. It takes, let's say your data is just not going in. You know it's there. You know that you have that field populated with the correct value, but yet when you open it in GP, it's just not there. It'll drive you crazy. So what I do is I choose this to file. It spits it out to an XML document, and I can see what it actually is writing. And it's very useful for figuring out why data isn't making it into GP. You do have to tell it where you want it to go. And then for every record you have, it will spit out a file and you can read it. I usually read it using a browser, a web browser of some type. Secondly, we choose the group. So really that's the module. I'm going to click this. So these are all the choices you have in SmartConnect. It's a much better list than an integration manager, if any of you are integration manager users. So these are all the places that we can import into. I have receivables. And then once I choose my module, I click on my node. You'll hear me say node a lot, and that's only because it's what they call it in SmartConnect. I'm going to click on that. So once I've chose receivables as my module, these are all the places that I can import into. I can apply transactions. I can apply cash receipts to invoices. I can bring in cash receipts. If I want to do, if I have inventory items that are assigned to customers, I can do that. Parent, I mean, all of these, obviously I'm not going to read them to you. They even have some delete nodes where you can delete records. And I will tell you, I have not tried that one yet. But today we are doing receivables transactions. Now this button, now if you do have Extender, which is another E1 product, they add this in there for you, so you can also import into those additional fields. Companies, so you can choose the company that you want. We're working in the TWO Fabricam company right now. I could choose both of them, and I've tested this out accidentally, and if I choose both of them, the data goes into both places. So be careful what checkboxes you click in here. And another thing that I like to do, if I'm testing something, I always make sure it's going into the test company and not my live company. Transactions are much more forgiving because they go into a batch. You can delete that batch, but master records are not so much forgiving in that case. All right, so now we're going to get down to the nodes. This is where the real fun happens. So in here, you can see all the things I can do. Create transactions. Let me go. I'm going to open up this screen over here because I find it is much easier to visualize what these fields represent. So receivables, transaction entry. This is the screen that I've chosen for us to import into. And when you're looking at this screen, you'll see, I'm just going to fill it out a little bit. This is all that we call this header data. This is on our transaction screen. Anytime you have to click on a button to go to a different screen, that typically means it's a different table and a different node in SmartConnect. So this distribution node button here really represents a different table inside of GP, which translates to a different node. So this part right here is the create transaction. But if I need to also import the exact GL accounts that I want, it will do it for us if we let it, but that would be this add distribution. And let's say this file I'm getting, it's from my website and we sell to people over the website and we get new customers every day and I don't want to have to type them in. I can also run it through this first. So it'll create the new customers that I have. It will create addresses for them. Then it will go and create the transaction and populate my GL accounts. Now I don't have to do all of those. You can see, and anytime you map one of these, and I'll show you what that means in a second, it'll have checkboxes next to it. So if you don't see checkboxes here, that means no one's opened it, no one's assigned any fields, and it's not being used in this integration map, which you can see I'm only using this one right now, which is the header. I'm going to double click on that. So over here on the left side, those are my source files. And it says it right there, source columns or source fields is what I should have said. These are all of the choices I have to put into a screen on this side. So these are my destination columns. And sometimes I don't know exactly what they mean. Like type, what does that mean? If I go over here and look at my screen, oh, it's this guy. And there's a little drop down and I can choose, is it a credit memo? Is it an invoice, a return? And in here we can choose what it is. It also has this list option and I can choose it. But let's say your data has both. It has invoices and it has credit memos. What we would do in that instance is create a calculation that reads something in the file that is an indicator and tells this, oh, we're going to go up here. So first I want to talk about actually, I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to click the preview button. So if you've ever used a different integration tool, specifically Integration Manager, you know that when you're in there mapping, you can't see what the data in your file is. You have to click away and go preview it. In here, I can preview it just like this. And I can see, oh, that's the field I want. Sales territory, that's the name of it. Sometimes you don't remember the name of it. Now, grouping is important. And I will tell you this, if you don't group in a way that matches your key fields, you will throw errors that don't make any sense. And without doing some research, it'll be hard to figure out what the problem is. But I can tell you that maybe 50% of the time, if you make sure you group it, and it is grouped on the same key field that you gave it, and I know you think, well, I shouldn't have to because I gave it the key field. I wish that were true, but it's not. If you group it on the invoice, these aren't really going to change. So let's say, so notice here, we have Adam Park in there 3 times. They have 3 different invoice numbers. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to group it on my customer instead. I can group it on all of the fields if I want to. And I'm going to click preview. Oh, it's giving me Adam Park 3 times anyway. Probably because my key field. I was expecting it to show me just one Adam Park. All right, we're going to go back to invoice. So groupings are important for you to get your records in the correct, let's say it's a Concur expense file and it has 3 different lines in there for your expenses under 1 employee. Do you want to bring those in 3 different invoices to pay? Or do you want to bring all 3 of those into 1 invoice and then pay that? So your grouping will define how those records come in. Now over here, I'm going to go through these column types because you have choices. Obviously, source column, that's just going to look over here and pick a field that you have in your source data. Now the other choices that I have, you can see this one is list option. List option only works when it's built in here, and so I could choose list option here, and it doesn't give me any lists. There's nothing there. Put this back to source column, but up here on document type, list option is there, and I have a bunch of choices. So, the list option is great when you can use it. You cannot always use it. The GP rolling. So one of our other choices is GP rolling. That is a great tool. So what that does is, let's say your file doesn't have invoice numbers because GP assigns those. So I need this map to know, go get an invoice number from GP, go get the next one. And we know that GP keeps that, it has a counter in our setup screens. And this GP rolling, we'll go open the GP rolling that I've created for this up here in additional columns. This is where we get to our calculations and GP rollings. So I'm going to double click on this GP rolling that I've created, and I've told it, go look in receivables and go look at sales invoices. And that's all I had to do. I don't even have to tell it which company because it knows already. And it just goes out there and grabs the next invoice number for me and populates it every time the record changes. Other things that you can see here, here's a calculation. So this batch number, we know we have to have batch numbers, and we like our batches to be nice and clean and have a good name. So I could hard code a name in there, which would be, let's see, hard coding is local constant. I typed the L on my keyboard and it took me to my choices that start with L. So local constant just means I can type whatever I want in there. I can type Natalie and everything in my file goes into a batch called Natalie every time I run this map. And if I want to change it, I have to open the map and then open this node and then type in what I want it to be. It's not really great as far as, being efficient. So what I typically do is I create a calculation. So C on my keyboard. And once I do that, it gives me a list of any calculations that I've created. We're going to go look at that. So back up here to additional columns and batch count. And then you have to be patient. So what I've done here is I've said, give me this prefix, this AR dash, and then tack on the current date, meaning today or right now. So whenever I push the button to run, it's going to look at the date and time on your computer, and it's going to make a batch named AR dash, whatever this date is. You don't have to use today. You can actually pull a date. So if I click on that, these are all the fields I have, and I know I have a date in there. There's my date. So I could use that instead. Let's say if I do that though, keep in mind, if I have a file that has multiple dates in it, I will create multiple batches. I will create a batch for every date that exists. So you definitely want to think about how you are creating these batch numbers when you do this. So some of our other choices are custom rolling. That's just a counter. You create a counter, you give it a starting number, and then it just grabs the next one every time you run it. If you've tested it 1,000 times, it will increment that custom number 1,000 times. A date calculation. So if you're getting a date in your data that doesn't really look like a date, it has the correct numbers in it, but it's not formatted correctly, you can use a date calculation to pull the specific pieces out. A global constant is something that you can use across maps. Global rolling column would be the same. We talked about list option. We've talked about local constant. MS SQL lookup is a great one. So instead of me doing what I did earlier and linking in the customer master table because I need a piece of information from there, I can actually use the MS SQL lookup, tell it, okay, I have a field, salesperson, and when I see that field, I want you to go look up that salesperson and tell me, what the state is that's saved on his card. So these are things that you can do with that. And then again, here is the translation. I showed you the translation table that I had. If I want to use that translation table, it needs to already exist. And then I actually have to go up here and create. I click on the columns to create something new. I create a translation. What column do I want to use? Do I have an account? We'll say amount. And I want to use this translation table. And so it's going to look at amount, look at my translation table. When it finds the amount that matches this, it will return this value. But that obviously doesn't make sense because mine has to do with GL counts. All right, so those are the column types that you have to choose from. You have lots of choices. It is very flexible. Let's go back to the actual mapping of these fields. So in this one, I've told it everything in here is an invoice. And all right, I'm told I have to speed it up. So I've told everything is an invoice. I am using a GP column to go and grab my next invoice number from GP. I've mapped my date. We know that I calculated my batch number using the AR dash. The customer number comes from my file. The document amount comes from my file. The sales amount. So these two are different. You know, if you look at the screen, you'll think, why is it asking me twice? Well, because here's how much I'm selling, but then this is how much my document is. So maybe there's taxes and freight in there, and those are different. The rest of this you'll see I don't have mapped because it can go out and pull the address code from my customer card unless I specifically map it. It will look at the salesperson ID, the shipping method, the tax ID, all that good stuff. Everything else in here, it will look up and calculate for me. I did give it a checkbook for the batch. Now, one thing I can do on this update existing, if I have that checked, it will try to override something that's already in that batch. So if it's already been posted, it's not going to update it. But if it's still sitting in a batch out there, you can check this box and just update what's existing. Typically, we don't use this for transactions. We use this for customer cards, inventory items, like if we were doing a price update on the inventory items, or you know, like a description change, fun stuff like that. All right, so that is creating a simple receivables transaction. I swept these around, so I'm gonna hit the run button. Actually, I'm not gonna hit the run button. I'm gonna show you guys these tasks because this is a little bit more important than running it. So this task tab is very useful, especially for file handling. So you get a file from your external source. It's named the same name every time you get it, but you would like to keep a history of it. So one thing you can do is you can right click on this, new task. You can copy the file that you used. You can delete the file that you used. You can move it. That's my favorite. And if I click move, so we'll say move file, and append date and time. There's my file. Where do I want to move it to? Let's make a new folder called archive. So every time this runs, it'll take that file, as long as it's this name, put a date and time stamp on the end of it, and move it to your archive. And then you don't have to do that every time. And if someone ever says, this didn't work, this doesn't have the right data in it, why is it wrong? You can go out to that folder, pull the file, and determine, you know, was it wrong in the file? Did SmartConnect do something with it? It is important to note that I place this task under the if map succeeds. And what that means is every single record made it in successfully. So if you have 100 records and 99 made it in, but 1 failed, then it falls under the tasks that run if the map fails. So if you still want it to get moved, even if 1 record didn't make it in, you will want to add this task to both areas. Another thing that you can do, like on the fails, is send an email. I don't have emailing set up, but you put in your destination email here. And if I check these boxes, it will send me a spreadsheet of the records that did not make it in. And it will also, in the body of the email, include all of the errors. So this customer doesn't exist. This document already exists. The sales amount does not match the document amount. Fun stuff like that. There's all kinds of errors that it will give you. All right, we're getting close. Let's see, I'm going to run it. Crossing my fingers because I did make some changes that I shouldn't have. A little risky during a webinar. And now we wait. Close that guy. It's still thinking. So while it is doing its thing, I'm going to switch back over here. We talked about we did not talk about node restrictions. We talked about scheduling. I do want to show you that fix button. So while we're waiting for that to run, I do want to tell you that E1 has a fantastic knowledge base. It's one of the best. I mean, being an IT person, and I'm constantly living in knowledge base articles, this is one of the best that I've seen. Any of your errors, if you go there and you put it in their search engine, you will get at least 3 answers. I would say 8 times out of 10. There are some common errors that you will run into when you first get SmartConnect set up. This source not found is a huge one. And basically, if you have users that are not local admins, then they cannot write the errors to their event log on their computer, the local computer, and they get these errors, and it's an easy fix. Here's the eConnect services running. Always make sure it's running, because if it's not, you won't get your map to run. Okay, so back to this. You can see that it counted 20 records. 18 made it in and 2 failed, which counts as a fail if we were talking about failing and succeeding. And this guy right here, this fix button, you think that it means it's going to fix your problems for you. It's not fixing anything, but it gives you the opportunity to fix things. And that is what's great about it. I'm going to click it. So these errors, if I hover over them, I get a lot more information. This one, if I double click on them, it'll actually open and I can look at it a little bit longer. So I can tell that it doesn't like the currency that I use. And I already know that these 2 customers are Canadian customers and I imported them as US. So that's part of my problem. Same thing here. So in this case, unless I fix my data, I'm not going to get it in there, but I do want to click on this fix button. Once I click it, we don't get to look at this anymore. So always look at these error messages first. Take screenshots if you need to. If it's not easy, sometimes you'll see this customer doesn't exist because you forgot to put it in, or somebody didn't put it in, or this GL account doesn't exist. They added a new GL account on the external system, but it didn't make it to GP. So let's say it was this customer doesn't exist or this GL account. I could leave this up, this fix screen, click over to GP, open my customer, add my customer, same thing with the GL account, do that, get it done, and then I can click this run all. And once I've eliminated the cause of the errors, I can click the run all. It will only import these 2 records that are there. I don't have to go get my file. I don't have to delete my batch, anything like that. It's pretty nice. Now, these are not going to work for me because of the currency, and we don't have enough time for me to fix that. But I did want you to see the fix button and how it works. And you can even, if something is wrong with the date or the customer number, maybe you have the wrong customer number in there, you can click into there and change the data and then run all, and it will run using what you typed in. It will not change it in your file, but it will change it as far as the data that it's compiled to shove into GP. So with that, I'm going to exit out, and we will go to the question portion of the session. Are there any questions, Alexis?
We don't have any right off the bat here, so let's give a minute. Please enter any questions you have into the chat box on the upper right-hand side of the screen.
And I will again apologize for going so quickly. I wanted to give you all of that information. And I think that we have recorded this session, so you will be able to go back and take a look at it again.
Yes, that's correct.
And let's see if I can talk about map locks. So while we're waiting for questions, if we don't have any, I will tell you about map locks. That is another one that I just briefly covered at the beginning, but you will occasionally see that something gets stranded. Maybe you left it open over the weekend, you went away, and the server restarted while that was still left open. That means that your map lock stayed in there even though your computer restarted. SQL still thinks that your map lock is there, and it doesn't let you run. Easy thing to do. Click this, find your map lock, and get rid of it. What else do we have in there? We talked about fix button, the scheduler, and the SmartConnect service, emails, node restrictions. We did not talk about that. So let's see if I can quickly get this guy to open. So sometimes you get data. So for example, I have had to work on a few concur imports where the client has multiple companies running inside of GP. They have an implementation of Concur. Concur grabs all the data for all companies, and then they spit it out. But only some of it needs to go in company A, some of it needs to go into company B. So with one file that we have to choose from, it sure wouldn't be fun if I had to open that file and split them up company by company. And instead of doing that, what I can do, I'm going to double click in here. I can have a map. I can build a map that works. Then I can duplicate it for however many companies I have, then open it, and inside of here, this restriction. So this restriction is basically a filter that will work against this entire node. If I do it, if I have multiple nodes, I will have to do this on each one. So on here, I can say something like, if, then I will, hopefully in your Concur file, you have a company code of some type. If company field, and I'm assuming there's a company field, equals TWO, then return true, which means, yes, bring that data in when I run this map. And then I would say else, return false. So everything else, do not bring it in. And that is one way for you to not have to open up. Yeah, company isn't a real field in here, so I already knew that. And the validate button is great because if you write some little if-then statement in here, you can always click the validate button and it will tell you if it's good or not. But that is node restrictions. And like I said, each one of these is considered a separate node. And if I put restrictions in, I have to do it on each one of these if I cannot somehow manage to do it up here. which usually that's what we can do. But did we get any questions yet?
Nope, I'm not seeing any in here, Natalie. But again, if anybody thinks of any questions after the session, they can always reach out and contact us at us-marketing@columbusglobal.com. So I think we're ready just about to wrap it up here. Was there anything else that you wanted to share, Natalie, before we head out?
No, I think that I covered everything that I wanted to cover.
Awesome.
So hopefully you guys were able to get some good information out of my presentation today, and you can go out and build some SmartConnect integrations.
All right, thank you so much, Natalie, for such a great overview of SmartConnect. That concludes our session. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you shortly for our last session of the day, GP tips and tricks, starting right at the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone.